Professor Langer, good morning.
Good morning.
Can you just introduce yourself and tell us why you are here today and why you are coming from so far from the United States to talk to us?
Well, I'm Art Langer, professor at Columbia University. My focus in research is tomorrow's technology executives. This is my second trip here to Villard-de-Lans. Prior to that, it was Autran, and very focused on the expansion of our work internationally. Columbia University does have a center in Paris, so the expansion through Europe, utilizing the center through France is extremely attractive, as well as some of the work that we're doing with underserved populations or socially excluded populations. The work that I'm doing helped found Social Lift, which is operating here out of Villard-de-Lans.
Okay, and while we're talking about Generation Y here and the mix between different generations, do you think the concept of Generation Y is relevant? And why it's very popular to talk about this generation? Because before we had a lot of different generations and we were not talking about it. Is it relevant, and is it because of ICT?
I think it's very relevant and different. Every new generation has its differences, but the unique aspect of this generation is that it is partnered with the dramatic impact that we're seeing of technology. And dramatic.
Why?
Because this population has been born with the technology. Utilizing it, living with it, is basic to their lives because they've been sleeping with it. Unlike most of us that are older, who have had to figure out how the technology affects what was the way their life worked. So they have to figure out how I'm going to use this technology to change the very way I live, whereas Gen Y is living it all the time. So they don't understand necessarily what all the problems are that the older generation is having.
Exactly. That's it.
It's every day to them.
What are the main problems people from Generation X or baby boomers have with this generation?
Well, I think one of the major ones is because you're born into the technology, particularly the social media aspect, is Generation Y does not seem to be as sensitive to security, protection of their knowledge, privacy. And this, of course, not only for the older generation is concerning, but also for businesses who are dramatically trying to figure out how to protect themselves against malicious behavior from the outside. At the same time, Generation Y wants to share everything and feels open about the connectivity. For example, if you were to ask, and maybe you ask yourself, how many friends do you have? Someone who's 40 years old would probably say 15. When you ask a Gen Y how many friends they have, they'll tell you hundreds. Because their very definition of a friend is very different because of social media. So you can see the distance of definitions of basic things like friend. It's different.
What is the impact in companies, in work, for management, for everyday life in the company? Is it difficult because we say that they are late or they don't like a hierarchic system? Is it true? And why is it so important? Why is it a problem? Because in the same time we say they are creative, they are very reactive. What do you think that?
I think it's dramatic. I think we will look back on this generation similar to the generation that lived through the Industrial Revolution. And by definition of a revolution, it means everybody gets impacted. Technology is affecting everyone. It's accelerating the way the world works. It's flattening the relationships of the world, which is why I'm here. To say that we can exist in the US or you can exist in France alone in today's world, every company is global. Every person will be global. And this is just changing the very fabric of how we live and how we do business. And those that won't change, similar to what happened in the Industrial Revolution, you go away. Businesses will fail that do not adopt. Organizations will fail. Countries will fail. Societies will fail unless they come to grips with this power. For example, you no longer can hide information. 30 years ago, we spoke about an iron curtain in Europe, in communism. That would be impossible today with the internet. So the notion of everybody knows. This could be known as the future of a world where there's no privacy, where everybody knows everything. And there may be some very good things about that.
Technology, communication is supposed to help people to have relations, communicate, and we see that in between these generations, it's difficult to talk and to have an understanding of the difference. Do you think to build this new society, because you speak about the revolution, things are failing, but when we destroy them, we create. Do you think that those two generations should talk and understand?
I think what's more important than talking is listening. And I think we have to listen to each other. Because by listening, we can understand what and why we do the things we do. And it is the very basis of beginning of the negotiation. We always know that the young people ultimately win. So we need to take advantage of what they're bringing to our society, what it will mean to the future, not of a company or a country, but to the world. Because this will ultimately break down the issues of a country, of a society, into a global world. And as educators, as a professor, as a university, we have opened up these centers in Amman, Jordan, in Istanbul, in Beijing, in Nairobi, in Santiago, in Rio de Janeiro. We are beginning to see that being a university in New York is not enough. We have to be global, dealing with people and issues throughout the world.
And don't you think that screens are kind of barriers between people? I mean, because when you spend, like they said yesterday, 16 hours a day behind the screen, it's not a frontier, because like we're talking, it's a quality of relations. Don't you think?
Well, I think it's a mistake to think that because we have technology that we don't talk, that we don't do the other things. We will see that, a balance. So for example, if I wanted to talk to you and you were in the same office as I was, every time I want to talk to you, I have three choices. I could send you a text or email, I could call you on the phone, or I can walk over and have a conversation with you. Each one of those is important within a specific context. And we must teach societies and young people which one to use, because to send a text sometimes is not effective. To have a phone call is two-way, and sometimes you really need to sit down and have a physical conversation. And this is what we need to work on, because Generation Y may be forgetting about the physical importance of these things.
Last question. Do you think there's links between the techniques, for example, hypertext, copy and paste, multitask, and the behavior of this generation? Because maybe the tools have impacts on their behavior, even on their brains.
Very much so. I think we are in the world of multitasking. Our businesses are actually requiring that. So, for example, if a student is sitting in a classroom and they're doing something on the internet, we have to understand what that really means and how that's balanced, as opposed to saying you must concentrate. Yes, you must concentrate, but the ability to make connections and link to things on one issue is so powerful today that somehow we must deal with that. So, for example, if you read a book today, you could read that book online. You may not need to read it sequentially from the beginning to the end. You may have hyperlinks in the book to other books. How do we teach people to take advantage of that, but at the same time, do not lose the beauty of the author's book from the beginning to the end? These are just an example of how do you teach that? If you have someone who's teaching you must buy the book and read it from the beginning to the end, that does not take advantage of the power that the technology is bringing to us. So think about that. The sequential reading of a book from beginning to end is under attack because I may not have to read it that way. I could read multiple books at the same time.
Camille was speaking about social lift, and the question is, what this generation, like others, maybe have to integrate a system and then change it, and how can this association can help these young people?
Yeah, well, I think this is a very serious problem. We are in an era where the number of jobs available are going down because of the power of automation. Because of technology, the ability to use other people in different places like India or Africa at lower costs are available. So the competitive nature of the way businesses utilize people has to change. The Generation Y is threatened to be left behind because if they don't have the skills to compete, they will fall into what we're seeing today of high unemployment. We need to rethink our education, what we call supply chain, of when people go to work. Too many are graduating and don't have the skills to compete. We see countries like India and China and Brazil that have very focused skills training, and they're able to compete in many different ways. If we outsource what we do, we cannot survive. So there needs to be a balance to this. Social lift is the first step to rethinking how we help our excluded youth to find their way, not necessarily as business, but as citizens. What is their contribution going to be? And this is a global issue. The other day, I was in an insurance company, and it said in the entrance, 1 out of every 3 people born today will live to 100 years old. Now, we have expanded life, growth of population, an aging population like we see in China, or probably in many countries, where the younger people have to support the older people. But if they're not working, how do we do that? So this gets into political and deep economic issues. And there's a very famous professor at Harvard University who said something that I always remember. His name was Porter. And he said, you cannot solve a social problem without solving the economics at the same time. You can give people money, but at some point you run out. So how do we rethink the way the economic system and social system is going to work? And if the older generations do not deal with this, there will be problems, because eventually Generation Y is going to be upset with that. And we've seen that historically. We saw it in the Industrial Revolution. So this is very, very important. People will have many more jobs in their life in the new generation than in the old. And what you do and how your work week is spent all will be changed dramatically because of the fact that you can work remotely.
And what would you say about what I would call the key skills they should have to compete?
I think that the skills will be dictated by the businesses. And therefore, universities need to have much closer alignment with what is going on in businesses, and to create better partnerships that in many ways they have resisted. They cannot be that independent anymore. So we need to rebalance that. And the design of curriculum will likely be shorter and shorter because the life of things are shorter. Okay? So you see a car. If you owned a car today for 10 years, it would be dramatically obsolete with what the newer ones. So we have less time to benefit from invention because the technology will keep accelerating for some time on new things, faster, better, cheaper, more competition. Businesses are going to say, what you did now is not enough. So we will see a lifelong learning. We will see a requirement for young people that they must continue to rethink their skills and what they do and how they're in step with the global marketplace and economies.
So the main skills would be to say, okay, you have to be able to rethink things, to be very smart, to be very reactive. So maybe.
And you need to enjoy that.
Yeah, to enjoy that.
You need to be agile. Agile. How long will this last? Technology is disruptive. It changes that cycle. It shortens it.
So be open to changement and to live everyday life, maybe.
Right. If I introduce a phone tomorrow that gives you more and is significant in a business context, the company that made the old one has to adjust to that. And we see this all the time. It's not necessarily good, but it is what this generation will be known for.
Some people say that generation will be shortened, reduced. Instead of during 20 years or 30 years, will be reduced because of that?
I think we will continue to see dramatic changes. So someone who is 15 right now is part of Gen Y, but the person that is born today will be even more superior in terms of their adaptation of technology. But this is not a bad thing, because young people are walking into an older world, and they need to understand how they can influence the change of that world, but not in a revolutionary way, but in an in an evolutionary way. And those will be the societies that will prosper. And we see the emergence of new societies, particularly South America and Africa. We saw a movement from the east, from the west to the east, in China, in India. Now we're seeing a movement from the north to the south, right? Africa, South America are becoming very, very focal areas of lower cost production. And then we will have the societies of India and China who will reach their challenges, who are now somewhat enjoying an area of prosperity, but as they become more educated societies and want more, this will become challenges for them as well. So it is going to be a very interesting world, but one in which can be very exciting. Healthcare will be better. People will be less sick. There are many things that are good about this world if we are able to manage it well. But France cannot make a decision by itself anymore. Neither can the United States. And I think overall that is not a bad thing.
Probably.
There's one society now, the world.